All right, so hopefully we still got an audience because the next show is going to be excellent. It's going to be a review of Social Dilemma, which is a Netflix documentary that I watched recently, and I watched it last night again, and it really is, I think, one of the best things I've watched this year, as far as as far as waking you up to the game that we're all sort of being kind of forced to play to some degree or another. So it's quite an interesting show. Let me see if I can get my guests on. We should be having Alexandria, who's in the HCPP studio live. Hello, Alexandra. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you? Can you hear me, hopefully?
I can hear you just fine. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, man.
See you next time.
Cool. Maybe you can grab some food and
I'm starving, man. I gotta get
starving
all day. Do you want me to bring you something?
Yeah, that'd be great, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll text you.
Right on. All right, and we have a few other friends that are going to join soon. Let me just check to see if they're going to be joining us for this part of the show. Yeah, Rafe and Nico are going to be joining us hopefully in a few minutes. So, Alexandra, tell us about the HCPP in Prague. Like, how are things going over there before we kind of jump into this documentary?
Sure. So it's pretty cool. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to look. If I'm supposed to look at the camera or not.
Yeah, look at the camera.
Look to the camera? Okay, cool.
Yeah, nice.
You're kind of on my side here.
Gotcha.
Okay. It's a much smaller turnout, but of course, that's just given the situation that we're in globally. That's the reason why. So I'd say there's probably, I don't want to give away the numbers just in case there's any kind of restrictions, but there are far fewer people here than would normally be here.
Right.
It's really cool. This is my first time coming to Prague, and my first time coming to Paralelní Polis. I always mess up that name. It's hard for me to say. I don't know why. But it's an incredible space. There needs to be more of these globally. I know we always talk about citadels and the concept of a living space, but we need to really think about how our society might look. I mean, we're pretty much in a time of, I call 2020 the year of death and destruction, which sounds kind of extreme, but right? We're really going through upheaval in so many ways, and it's so much more than the pandemic. And I think we're starting to see the blinders being ripped off for all the things that we've kind of held as dogmatic truth throughout the years.
Yeah. Into that, this is one of those years where the veil just gets lifted, and it's all very like there's this sort of vibe of like this apocalyptic vibe going on, like all the memes being shared, like the swarms here and there, and then the orange sky in California and the west coast of the United States. So it's a very interesting time. I think a lot of the choices that we make this year are probably going to be multiplied manifold in the future. So we gotta play it right. All right, we got another guest. Nico's coming on. Welcome, Nico. Good to have you. Hopefully, Rafa will join us as well.
Hey, I'm also over here. I just don't have a camera on this computer.
All right, so we got an R. That's good. It's all good.
Hey guys, Nico here.
Hello?
Great. So
Can you hear me well?
Yes, we got your audio.
Excellent.
We got your audio.
What's
All
up?
right. It's good. How are you guys doing? Where are you guys joining us from?
I'm at my citadel at an undisclosed location. One of them, at least.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, you're one of the Bitcoin citadels. Fantastic. All right, so I'm just tweeting this out. Let's share the link just to see if we can get some more people on the show, and then we'll start the social dilemma review. I watched it again last night, and it blew me away again. It's really quite a good documentary. It's got its own kind of bias and political bias in its own way, but I think it's really touching some important topics about just the how social media is actually affecting our minds. Like there's a real mental health consequence to it, and it does seem like it's banging against the matrix of society, the fundamental layers, the fabric of society, the fabric of civility. perhaps it's because I'm so in the middle of whatever people call the cultural war or whatever it's going on, today on the internet. But it feels like, it feels like very important discussions are happening, and it doesn't seem like the war or this sort of conflict is being played in a symmetric way. It's all very asymmetric, and so hopefully we'll get to touch on some of those topics. What do you guys? One of the ways that the documentary, let's just get it started now. One of the ways the documentary addresses the problem is by asking the question of what is the problem? What is the problem with that we're trying to discuss here? And maybe one of you guys can take the lead on this. Alexandra, you're only going to be here for about an hour, I believe. So why don't you share your thoughts with us?
Sure. I think what happens with social media is it magnifies. So, we're essentially presented with I'm trying to describe this. It's, if things are really great, it's going to magnify it. If things are really bad, it's going to magnify that as well. And I can't imagine being, just turning as a teenager, 11, 12, 13, what it's like to grow up only knowing this world. I'm lucky in that I didn't have social media as much when I was younger, so I think I avoided some of that. But one of the things that really is concerning is the echo chambers that it creates, and the fact that you see this in YouTube. You watch something, and I've said this before, you watch something, and then you watch something else, and the algorithm suggests something else. And first couple are usually good, and then all of a sudden you're presented with something with a really extreme viewpoint. You're like, whoa, how did I arrive here? Sometimes that's interesting, but a lot of the times it just really seems like really polarizing content, and it's something that you have to believe one way or the other, and it's almost like it's dividing us into tribes. So the best way to conquer a population is divide and conquer and distract. So I think disconnecting is absolutely a good thing to do from time to time. Critical thinking is key. But when you're bombarded by media in the social realm, you're always trying to play catch up. You're always trying to keep on top of all of your channels. So you don't really have that time to reflect and develop that critical thinking muscle that's so important. So once that atrophies, it's really easy to get drawn into that echo chamber of likes. And I mean, it's like crack cocaine, essentially. The dopamine release that you get. You've got
it's legitimately addictive. Like it actually is doing the same things that other sort of addictive behaviors or even drugs are actually doing to your brain. It's releasing dopamine, and one of the things they talk about is that it actually works kind of like the casino games. Has a very similar structure.
It is. It's applied game theory, and to say that it's not is really to fool ourselves. So I think an understanding of game theory is something, if you're concerned about social media and the effects that it might have on you, which I'm certain that if you have more than 3 channels, there is definitely an effect. You may not see it right away. It might be something your thinking changes subtly. All of a sudden, you're more quick to anger about something, or you have very definitive viewpoints on things that you may not have had before. So I think taking the time to reflect and examine is really key. But again, it's that constant, the ever faster running hamster wheel, which is hard to jump off.
100%. Nico, your thoughts?
So yeah, the dopamine means that it's your body's way to tell you that you're on the correct path, and that's why it's so addictive, because you think you're doing the correct thing because it makes you feel good. That's why you get dopamine. That's why sex gives you dopamine, and it tells you that you're on the right path. However, it's the responsibility for an individual is much greater now because there's so much noise. I mean, basically all of the information is out there. So you can get your dopamine fix from a lot of stuff. And it's about you to choose those things. And well, we tend to choose social media. It can also be very very effective. Like, in fact, I would still say the same. I would still maintain the same position I've had since the 90s when I first started using social media. When I started, like chatting up girls on some kind of like text-based browser in the library, stuff like that. At that point, for me, it was completely obvious that this will be a new way to live, new way to act as a human being and to communicate. And now somehow we are acting surprised when this prophecy has come true, which kind of the writing was on the wall from the beginning, at least for at least many of us who were in the internet when internet started going mainstream around the end of 90s and to early 2000s.
Yeah, I think this is really such an interesting topic, and I want to just give people like background to the actual topic, because if you haven't watched the documentary, it's a little bit hard to wrap your head around what they're saying. But one of the interesting points that they made is that the internet was sold to the public as a way to connect to the world in a new way, to increase connection. It was all about connection. I don't know if you guys remember this, but that was all it was about. It's like connection is really good. Good connection is good. So you go connect with everybody and connect with all your high school friends and all the people from all over the world, and everybody can follow you and you can follow anybody else anywhere in the world. It's all about connection. But the way that this has evolved is that in every connection between two peers, there's an AI it's this machine,
And it's going to be a little
organism, this corporate and technological machine with algorithms that not even its top engineers can fundamentally understand what they're doing. There's this machine watching, and it's watching there, and it's looking for opportunities to introduce concepts and ideas and content into your mind that will be profitable or that it can sell to advertisers as impressions. So the advertising business model has attached itself like a parasite on the connections that the internet has created. And that parasitical relationship actually is what's funding the underlying infrastructure, right? So social media has grown and has been able to sort of develop as we have it today, thanks to the advertising model in part, and thanks to those profits. Even though right now we're using open source software that doesn't have any advertisements through Jitsi, that works perfectly well, right? So it's very possible to like actually sidestep out of that system, but so many people are obviously not using this software. They're on Twitter, they're on Facebook, they're on Snapchat, they're on TikTok, and on every one of those platforms, they're sort of on the other side of the screen, behind the black mirror. There's this supercomputer that knows everything about you. It's not really technically a supercomputer, but it's sort of this technological beast that knows everything about you and has its own agenda and its own interests for your future behavior. And we, on the other side of the screen, know almost nothing about it. And that's sort of the asymmetry of this conflict. And, most of the time, they're just going to try to sell you stuff. But occasionally, they're going to try to get you to vote for this or that person, or try to get you to engage in some particular activism, try to get you to engage in a particular form of politics or conflict. And then once you get that, you have to step back and wonder what's actually going on in the world. Like, this is modern warfare that we're experiencing. It's information warfare at its finest, in a way that's just been unimaginable, I think, up until this point. Maybe Alexandria have some thoughts on that, or Nico, take it away. Anybody else? How does that sit with you guys?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. It comes down to distraction, and it was sold to us as connecting with, connect with your friends, connect with people that halfway across the world, and you maybe went to school with and college with, and it sounds great, and I think we fell for it hook, line, and sinker, and I don't know that the motivations were nefarious in the beginning. I mean, if you look at when the internet was developed, initially it was a hardened military communication system to be available should there ever be a nuclear war. So that in itself is kind of polarizing if you think about it. what was it truly meant for, or was it something that has now democratized speech in a way where you've got access to all of the body of human knowledge that exists, although it's quite filtered. The internet that we see is I forget the exact metrics, but it's a tiny percentage of what is out there, and we can thank Google for that primarily because of all of the filtering algorithms, and you see all the people that may have differing viewpoints from the norm, where it's threatening to the people that control these systems. And you see the advent of cancel culture and people being shadow banned. It's all of a sudden it becomes dangerous again to think and speak freely, which I think is a very, very dangerous place for society to be. Words should never be forbidden, and we're very much at a place where that's happened, and that's reinforced with all of the the social building up and the social division that people experience based on what their viewpoints are. And I think we really ought to. It would be really helpful if we could stop and think. Do I really believe very strongly in this? And, is it worth dying on this hill for this viewpoint? Yeah. Or does the other person have a point that maybe I don't agree with, but I can still respect them as a person? And I think through social media, these echo chambers, they really pull us to be, it's polarized. It's black or white. It's good or bad. There is no in between. There is no discourse. There's no debate. And even the word debate, when used in an online forum, is essentially it's a forum for attack. And attacking the other viewpoint and making the other person look foolish. So I don't know. It's an interesting. I definitely agree with the information warfare part, and it's a very, very powerful medium. Media always has been. The ability to broadcast, the ability to share your thoughts with an audience, the ability to. You're essentially touching hearts and minds, and that's an intrinsically powerful thing, just at the core of our psyche. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was Elon Musk that said that Twitter is a battleground or something like that. It's like a trench warfare, right? Like you're not there to have peaceful, friendly conversations. It's war. And Nico, what are your thoughts on this? Actually, Rafa is the one that has his hand up. Tell us, Rafa, what you think.
Yeah, I do agree that it is really horrifying that our history becomes like a burden that we are putting it on social media, so it's not like we can just forget our history just as easily, and that affects humans a lot. You can't just go on and move to another city and forget everything that you've done, but you just can't really start that easily just over. And I think that's pretty like a bad thing. I don't want to talk about solutions just yet. I think we're gonna get to that. But I think it depends on how you think about the situation. It is horrifying that we are now like concentrated on these certain social platforms, and we are, even some people are using just one. So it gets really easy to control your whatever you see on the news feed or wherever. But I just think that we should try to just split it out a little bit more, just use different applications for different things, for different services, maybe different IDs, or just try to split it out into just like smaller parts, so you're not just so dependent on one like media or whatever.
Right.
I think you get like you should even try to read articles, hear some podcasts from different platforms, and also just have basic discussions like in meet space if possible, and just try to get information in much more like many different ways. And I think it's just like any kind of drug, the social media, like likes and all of that stuff that we just have to endure. It's not right, but we can't really. I just don't think it's all right to go on and try to like ask for the government to try to come and help out in this case.
Right. So I mean that there's so many topics on the table, which is why this I'm so glad we're having this discussion, because I mean one thing is talking about solutions, and I think there are some solutions, and we can leave that for the end. We got basically 2 hours to talk about this, so we have hopefully enough time to really wrap our heads around this and create a really good conversation here. So let's leave solutions for the end, even though it's a really good topic. Something else is the title of the documentary is fantastic. So social dilemma, right? And I think the dilemma that they're sort of touching on here is that, you know, one option is to sort of step away from social media, and if you do that, yeah, you'll be sort of away from its influence, which is it's not a trivial amount of influence. Like you're talking about your exposure to potentially useful information out there, so you can step away from it. But if you step away from it, you're separating yourself from the conversation, right? Like we're in a world now where 2 billion people are on Facebook. You know, major news break on Twitter before they reach the general public, right? And so to step away from social media is to some degree to step away from society and to remove your influence from society. And so that's the dilemma, right? If you want to play the game, you kind of have to be on Twitter. You don't have to be, you know, you don't have to be engaging, but your presence is felt, right? If you make the right tweet, like I've made tweets that have gone viral. I've made tweets that have had 200,000 plus impressions and hundreds of retweets and hundreds of likes, and that I end up finding them being sort of linked and sourced in media articles months later. It's like that was a contribution to a conversation. That was impact on the conversation, whether good or bad. If I hadn't been on Twitter, I wouldn't have engaged. Now, the other side of the problem is that by being in social media, they're consuming our attention, and it's not like our attention it's not like we have full control over our attention. They've managed to get, you know, like if you go to their website, thesocialdilemma.com, there's like a little notification on the center, like a little bell with a red 1, right? And if you click it, it's like, hey, we knew you would click this, right? They've managed to engineer symbols that are incredibly powerful, are attempting our mind and our attention. That that pineal gland stuff that's like, I must click it. If you go to that website, it's very difficult to resist clicking that little bell. And that's the game that we're playing, right? And so they're sort of driving our attention, and they can drive it in areas that in ways that are not necessarily, you know, in our best interests, right? So much to talk about. If anybody wants to has any comments on the top of their tongue.
There was a lot there.
Really quickly, just point out that I do also think that the social dilemma name is much better than at least the Finnish translation of it, which is dangers of surveillance capitalism. So yeah.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, yeah. So maybe the let's talk a little bit about the techniques that they're using to kind of help people understand the complexity of this, because I mean, a lot of this stuff is just going to be unconscious to people, right? Like a lot of the ways that these machines are engineering our attention and our interest are very subtle. And one of the ways that they describe the problem is that these platforms, these social networks that have advertisement-based models, their customers are the advertisers, and the product is human futures. They deal in human futures, and that's literal. We're literally talking about your future. They're selling your future behavior to advertisers. They're looking to manipulate and influence your behavior in a particular direction to improve their financial position. And I'm a capitalist. Like, I'm not against advertisement, but man, you know, it really can cause some problems if it's used with nefarious ends. Which, you know, it might actually be happening.
I would just like to point out that I don't think that capitalism inherently is always good. I just think that it depends about your time preference. And these companies seem to have a really high time preference because they are going for the really easy and fast games. They are not playing like the long game where they're really gonna, just try to even like get the social status to be like a good participant for the community or for the world. They are just, they're gonna know that they're gonna get caught about all this and they are gonna get like crucified for it. So they're just doing the money grab now, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely not long-term time preference, and it's not clear that they are immune to this. Like, one of the things that they talk about is how this guy, I can't remember his name, but basically the main guy in the documentary, he's talking about how he wrote a report, shared it on Google. Everybody got excited about it. It got to the top levels of Google. This was an important cultural moment that Google had to respond to, and then all of a sudden, quiet. It was like it was forgotten, and they didn't really address why. But it's later on they kind of show an example of the kid. The kid is talking to his friend, and the girl's in the background, and they're kind of talking about whether he should go and talk to her. And then the AI in the background is saying, "Oh my God, we can't get his attention. How do we get his attention? Send him a notification, right?" And then boom, they distract him in the conversation, and it never happens in real life. I mean, maybe that's what happened. Maybe the machine itself was like, "Hold on, what if that was what happened, right?" Like, either people behind the machine on the other side of the screen, or the algorithm itself just distracted them. I mean, who knows, right? Like, you could go that science fiction-y, or you could just, but the fact the conversation ended is the point, and the fact that obviously that conversation was against the interests of the machine itself. So now we're getting into like Terminator grade sort of manipulation, right?
Indeed. One of the things, so I don't like focusing on the problem so much, and like I do until I understand it. But I like focusing more on the solutions. And
Sure.
You mentioned long-term thinking and short-term thinking. There's a really interesting website if people want to go check it out. So there's a thing called the Long Now Foundation, and you can find it by going to long, so L-O-N-G, now, N-O-W.org, and it gets you thinking in a different time frame. I'm just looking at the site right now. There's a blog. There are seminars you can take. It's quite interesting. Their mission statement, it was established in 1996, and it's interesting because they have 1996, to foster long-term thinking and responsibility in the framework of the next 10,000 years. So that's a much longer time frame than the milliseconds that of reaction time we see in social media. So yeah, if you're feeling bombarded by social media and you don't really know where to go next, sometimes looking at the polar opposite. So if you're thinking really short term, look at something like this, and it might just engage your thinking and awaken some senses.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest concerns that I have with all of this is that, and there seems to be some psychology research behind it, is that it actually erodes your long-term thinking, and the parts of the brain that deal with that, and it sort of gets you hooked on this sort of very short-term sort of follow the news cycle kind of habits, and that's how they control you. So
I wouldn't say that's how they control you so much as I say that's how you leave yourself open to being controlled.
Right.
I do think that the individual still has a lot of armor that we can use against social machines, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got to exercise those muscles. It's like a physical muscle. It'll atrophy if you don't.
Yeah, 100%.
I feel like this. I feel like there's been a lot of talk about right and wrong, and it's kind of black and white thinking. And my thinking is that who are we to decide what is right or wrong? This is just a high time preference business model, basically. And to address a couple of points you made up earlier, I like the information war. It's definitely going on. I think the World War III has already started. It's just information type of war. We are being, controlled by the narrative because it's much more cost effective than by monopolizing the means of violence, which kind of like the state has already done and has done a good job in convincing people that they need the state, and then now they are easily being controlled by social media and narratives. But that's kind of like a tangent to the whole social media thing. What I think is, like, there's nothing wrong with the business model. In my opinion, I just don't like it myself. That doesn't mean other people don't. So basically, the way I see it is the users are paying for a service that they find valuable. And yes, Facebook is technically, monetary speaking, free, but what you pay in is your information. And yes, not everybody realizes this, but this is kind of like, if somebody is selling you skimmed milk and it's not skimmed milk, and somebody buys it as such and is happy with the purchase, is there really whose fault it is? Everybody's happy except some social justice warrior who is overlooking the situation and feels it's unjust, and then you have to do something about it. What I think is we need to move away from the black and white thinking, and I think that was a really good point that Alexandra made there, that we are thinking into black and white, right and wrong, and we can only make that distinction for ourselves. And personally, I find that the good starting point is never to initiate violence or steal, which is essentially all the forms of initiating violence is a form of stealing. So that's kind of like the baseline standard that I personally have. And then it begs the question, have the social media companies been stealing from people? Maybe. I don't have the data to say either way, but I wouldn't take the risk that they're not stealing. I think it's besides the point that if they are actually doing something wrong, I think it's what they are not doing is coercing people into using their services, because that would be clear act of violence.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that argument, and I think that's I'm glad you bring that up, because this is sort of at the crux of a lot of tensions and the discussion right now is, so that what you described is the basic sort of non-aggression principle, right? No theft, no murder, no initiation of violence. But one of the areas that I find libertarian sort of moral theory lacking in is sort of the how to deal with fraud, because fraud is a verbal sort of field of let's say like engagement, and fraud deals with miscommunication or perception manipulation or misrepresentation of situations, right? And I mean, obviously, like the crypto market has been, the ICO bubbles and all these things that have happened. There's been a lot of fraud there, and I think you could argue that there's a kind of misdirection and deceit that's happening. I mean, I don't know if this can totally be argued, but I think it's an interesting sort of line of thinking to explore. Is like, are we being deceived by these social networks? Like, to what degree are these machines manipulating our thinking and misrepresenting? And this brings us to the fake news controversy, which, I mean, ever since I've been politically awake, or ever since I've been even thought about politics, I've always sort of seen politics as the field of lies and corruption. I mean, in Colombia, people don't really have very high regard for their government. And then as soon as I became a libertarian, is like, okay, the media is entirely co-opted. And then today it's just entirely insane. Like, there's literally two parallel narratives playing out in the United States. And there's, and it's also happening in everywhere else, right? There's sort of parallel narratives, and these machines, for whatever reason, even if it's just the business model in the way that it works right now, or some more nefarious agenda, they'll present you with whatever, confirms your bias, basically. And so everybody's just in this like bubbles of information consumption that reinforce their biases and radicalize them and entrench them and make them feel like it's what they think is entirely obvious and everybody agrees with them, except that they're just isolated in this little bubble, right? And it seems like we're headed towards sort of greater conflict here. However, it may just be that that's the bubble that I'm in, right? And I'm just sort of, I'm also radicalized, right? And that could certainly be the case. So it feels like this is a much deeper issue than just business as usual. And I do think a conversation is sort of warranted.
I don't think there's anything wrong in being radicalized. I consider myself radicalized in many ways. That just means that you like to, you like the volatile lifestyle, basically. You like the chaos. You thrive in the chaos. Well, at least, and that's what I feel like I do. But like who you wield your social media account for in the world war of, information age. That's the question that I would urge everybody ask themselves. If you're not wielding it for yourself, which you should, and only for yourself. I see a lot of accounts put in their bio that opinions are my own, but are they really? That's they should be, certainly, but that is not the case. As you guys discussed earlier, we've been manipulated and we've been fed this confirmation bias, essentially, which is really powerful because it's people tend to believe anything that is complementing their current worldview and putting their past choices in a better light. So it's really easy to convince people to change their minds that way if it's perceivable that they benefit from that. But that results in cognitive dissonance because inside people know that they're being misled. Probably I would think that way. I certainly felt that way when I was kind of like in the Matrix still, which is not that long time ago, so it's still fresh in my mind. So how it feels is like you think that you are on the right path and you are acting like that, but you don't feel it. You don't feel good. You just feel like self-destructive and depressed. And I think that's a big problem, in the fiat culture and in the high time preference culture, which is bred by fiat culture, and we're just looking for that quick dopamine hook wherever we can get it. We want to get outraged. We want to be scared because that's like, survival instinct or whatever that we're missing from the caveman times. I don't know, really.
Well, anytime that you're looking, you look outside yourself for fulfillment or anything like that, you're essentially becoming a slave to the system, which is not good. It's very addictive, and it can be very addictive. But it's something that if you don't take ownership for what you enjoy out of life, if you're always looking to what's being shown to your programming, if you will, like even if you look at TV, it's a list of programs. So really, a lot of it is programming a narrative, and it really is as simple as that when you break it down. And especially as you look at social media and how much has amplified that. You've got real-time connection, 24/7. Constant. And you can connect with somebody halfway across the world. So you've always got different time zones, so you can connect in, and it never stops ever.
Yeah, it's infinite. It's practically infinite.
Mm-hmm.
There's no end to we don't have enough time to consume all the content, to watch all the memes, to watch all the YouTube videos and all the documentaries. There's always something fascinating on the internet for you to click, and there's no end to it. And interestingly enough, it seems like the future demands a kind of sort of stoicism or a kind of discipline from us that we have to rise to. Otherwise, we're just going to become kind of like that movie where it's a really good Pixar movie. WALL-E, I think was called WALL-E, where all the everybody's fat and in this little wheelchairs, floating wheelchairs, and just all the robots feed you, and the screen is always in front of you, and everybody's just in this machine, and nobody really has control, and they don't really know that they're headed towards a great catastrophe, right? I think the greatest tragedy of this this machine, the greatest cost that you won't be seen until it's experienced, is the potential time, like the waste of energy that can go along with it. Like I've been in social media for 10 years. I've been politically engaged for 10 years. And I wonder sometimes, like, if I had channeled that energy into something else, if I maybe, instead of like if I turned 10% of all my social media posts into just articles or into writing a book, I mean, I probably would have put out a few books already, right? And at least one book, right? And it's sort of like that's the great strategy, right? That everybody thinks that they're doing something important, and maybe it's actually not that important to them.
It's interesting that you couch that as important versus not important. So I think as the medium shifts, sure, you may have had the time to write a book, but what about the people that are so engaged in social media where they have the time to read the book? Sometimes a well-constructed tweet gets way more engagement than a potential book would, which is really sad, because I think a well-constructed book, a well-constructed argument is really a thing of beauty. And for people to be like, oh, I don't have time, and I'll just listen to the Audible version of it, you miss a lot. I mean, Audible's I guess a good compromise, but thinking like beating yourself up, thinking, I've wasted so much time. It's really not your fault. It's the medium that's changed, and it's the way that we interact in society that's changed. So it's a double-edged sword.
Interesting. I feel like we need to. There's this sort of idea in the air that there's no moral wrong here. That there's nothing that maybe this is just the free market playing out. Because Facebook is a private company, and what's wrong with what they're doing? Is there anything like? Is this just manufactured concern? Like, is this sort of fake concern, or is there really something that we should be concerned about here? Is there something that we should really protect ourselves from? Rafe, go for it.
Yeah, I do think that there is this horrifying situation that we are currently trusting these big corporations with a lot of our information, and a lot of responsibility, and like a lot of possibilities to manipulate us and decide what we think and all that stuff. But I do think that it's just our current situation that we are so eager to go into these beautiful, nice UI, and without thinking anything else, without thinking your privacy or who you're gonna leak your data to. I just think that this is one phase, and this is gonna blow off. I mean, we're gonna see what the big issues are with this system, and there's gonna be some new solutions that try to address these, but it just takes time. And sometimes, we just don't learn before we actually get burned. So, but I do believe that we are still, I don't know if you guys have read this book called Sovereign Individual, but yeah, it does have a lot of positive, good things, and kind of predictions about the future and the information age and where it might lead us. And I do think that it is pretty correct. It just, the time frame is just much bigger than what we maybe think.
Yeah, I'm actually listening to it on Audible right now, and I'm probably halfway through it. So that there's a few questions about it that I haven't found a good answer to yet. For example, but this is the question, right? Like we are transitioning into an information age. We are transitioning away from potentially from a physical control of resources model, right? Like if you look at banks still have security protocols that were designed for a pre-internet era. The debit card was invented pre-internet. I'm pretty sure that. And a lot of the security protocols are designed to handle your information as if it was printed on paper and stored on a shelf somewhere. But in the digital age, there's 50 copies of it on databases of their control. And if one of them gets hacked, then your data is on the internet. And now it's being sold in the black market, and now you're vulnerable to identity theft, and now somebody can go and open up a credit card on your behalf, and then you're stuck with the bill, and you got to deal with the legal consequences of that. And that's not a theoretical attack, right? An OPM hack, which happened a few years ago, allegedly led by the Chinese, led to they hacked something like 20% of Americans, and most of them were government employees, and and we're talking about medical records and social security numbers, everything. A lot of people there suffered identity theft, and so this is the collapse of nation states' ability to protect their own at that level. This is a very, very serious transgression of security. And so I guess the question is, can modern government structures, can modern, the world's current strategy for resolving conflict, because that's kind of how I think of it, is is democracy going to survive this, or is it going to crumble? And what's that transition going to be like? And I think eventually, I do have faith in the world. I think we eventually will sort of settle again on something reasonably good. But, I think that's the great test, right? Can American democracy survive the internet age? I think we're watching that play out right now. Are we?
I think we're exhibiting kind of high time preference on this issue, because nobody knew how to use internet just not that long ago, and now it's basic knowledge. Every toddler knows how to use an internet and a smart device, because there was an incentive to do so. They achieved some ends that they felt like striving for by using the technology. And they paid the price of learning to do so because it was worth it, because they thought they're going to get something more from it, and they did. And the same applies here. As soon as the incentives are aligned against using this kind of service, I do believe people will stop. A lot of people left Facebook. I left Facebook after it became, probably should have left way earlier, but I did eventually. I think everybody has that tipping point after which you start to realize that the price you pay is not something that you're willing to pay. Of course, at this point, it's too bad for many people that it might be that the price has already been paid for many generations to come, because as you said, you give your information out once, unless you're going to redo your identity, you have to assume that they are being marketed all around the market. And by the way, there's no such thing as black market, in my opinion. It's just market. Black is just a way to assign virtue somehow.
Well, that brings us to this question of the black market. Is actually, I think, at the core of many of the problems we're watching, because it's not only the manipulation of attention, which is it's a subtle thing. It's kind of hard to understand what the great negative consequences are. But on the other hand, we've seen the general political conversation and sort of discussion, exploration of truth in general in the world be decided upon by a technocratic elite, right? When you have Alex Jones banned from every social network and every Silicon Valley platform, including their servers being sort of have the plug pulled on them. This guy's platform, he'd been on a part of political conversation in the United States, whether you like him or not, for something like 20 years, maybe more. And the guy was at his peak, bigger than CNN and bigger than many of the other sort of mainstream media platforms combined. And they still were able to basically destroy his business. The guy's he's still running Infowars.com, and the show's still going on. But if they can shut him down, they can shut anybody out. Forget shadow banning. They can straight up ban you if they can justify it. And this guy's not a white nationalist or a racist or anything. He's just a libertarian guy. I'm sure he said crazy stuff. Yeah, sure. Who hasn't, right? But all he's doing is talking, on the internet. And the fact that they can influence that is actually quite dramatic. And I think that's one of the big problems, right? That's the battlefield that's being fought over right now, is where if you can't be heard because all the platforms for communication decide that whatever you think is wrong, then now we sort of set ourselves up for, potential, conflict in the future. And again, like if you have this sort of kind of nihilistic, perhaps, or this sort of or fundamentally faithful and optimistic worldview that everything will sort itself out, it's like, okay, cool. But that means that maybe there have to be a few wars that have to be fought in order for the situation to get resolved. And maybe we will lose, like maybe freedom will lose. Maybe we'll end up in Brave New World where everybody's just completely connected to the Borg and we're completely disconnected from our nature and from, like, the truth doesn't matter. It's just whatever you believe to be, whatever the Borg wants you to believe, that's what you should believe, and everything else gets shut down. I don't know. I mean, that's, at some point we have to really plant a flag on some values and then just hold ground, because otherwise we're just leaves on the wind,
I used to think that way. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead. It's fine.
Okay. So I used to think the same way before I found Bitcoin. And I think, like, Bitcoin is speech. That's uncensorable speech. So it has set the precedent that there is a way to communicate without being censored. And that's enough. And sure, we don't have a decentralized Twitter, and probably we will never have that, because by nature it's a centralized service, and centralized services are great because they are great at what they are doing, that very niche. They can do it the most efficient way and develop it just the way that the customers like it, and then of course use it whichever way they want it for so-called good or evil, depending on perspective. But there's always an option. Like I said earlier, like if enough people decide that this sucks, I'm not going to use it anymore, there has to be a better one. And right now a lot of people are on Twitter. Now if Twitter starts to tighten the rope, then there's going to suddenly be an incentive to move to more decentralized, more censorship resistant ways. And there's already like messaging services that use Lightning Network and stuff. You send like 1 or 2 sats and then your message is there. And I think it's only going to get better and more user friendly. So there's also this kind of like I said, we need low time preference. It will take time for people to realize these things. And a lot of people who I've talked to, so-called regular people who are still in the matrix, they fully realize that it's not super good what Facebook and all those big companies are doing with their data. But they don't really know what to do about it. What should they do about it? Why should they care? But that day will come. I believe so. And I think at that point, the people will have to step up and take the responsibility. And even if they don't, it's really not our concern. We have the option to do the other way. And I think that's what we should focus on and inspire people by example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I settle on that. At the end of the day, the question is, can I live a good life without having, some external party really interfere? Can I do what I want to do? Which is, if I do bad things, right? Again, like if I violate the NAP against somebody else, right? Then there should be, that shouldn't just be unaccounted for, so to speak. Like there should be some way for people to defend themselves in that regard. But I guess we'll see where we go, right? Because, in a way, we're living in this sort of weird combination of dystopias, and in many ways, it's a utopia, right? Like the fact that we can have this conversation right now is fantastic. The fact that we can do it internationally, live, instantaneously, and fed into the internet where hundreds of people can watch it, that's really incredible. And it's a very powerful thing. And so, it's one of the things they said in the documentary is like both simultaneously it's utopia and dystopia, right? I think one of the concerns is that at any moment, if a bad political movement like shifts in the wrong direction, all this data and all these technologies can be suddenly weaponized and potentially, used for real bad things, right? I mean, one of the things that you can do is you can incite violence publicly against an individual, dox them, and rally a mob and have them show up at their house, and then suddenly shit hits the fan, right? And that's actually happening. And part of the problem is that these platforms are also politically biased, so sometimes they'll ban that and sometimes they won't, depending on who's doing it, depending on if they catch it. So it's a very strange world. And I mean, yeah, okay, maybe time will settle it. Maybe we just sort of gotta give it time, but that means we gotta survive it. That's basically what it is. We gotta be able to survive the turmoil.
Yeah, I do agree. Sorry, go ahead, Dar.
Thank you.
Yeah,
One of the core issues is if you step back and look at it, there's a ton of money on the table. And I believe that social media, I can't remember the exact statistics, but I heard it somewhere that, which who knows if it's true, but there is so much money to be made that essentially it's the easiest business model in the world. People are so easily manipulated. So if you have if you want to start a war, why use your resources when you can incite that on social media? And all you need to do is place a couple of well-constructed tweets, and it gets the ball rolling. And there is so much, there's so much research behind this, and there's so many firms that do this, this attention marketing, if you will. That's not going to become a term, but it probably will be. It's terrifying, and we're at. It really speaks to our nature of. So there's a few things that are happening behind the scenes. There's our fundamental herd mentality, and that's tied to some really strong, really ingrained core not principles, but essentially it's the survival mechanism. You have to get along with your tribe. If you're shunned from the tribe, many years ago, that meant literal death. So that's something that's been ingrained throughout the centuries. And it's something that we don't really think about because our time preference, like we've talked about, is so narrow, and the window through which we see the world is tiny. But we have to remember that there are generations that came before us that they didn't have this short time preference. This has really only been a big issue, I'd say, in the last 100 years. Really, once we had, regular television broadcasting. TV is not the root of all evil, but it's when you have a distribution method that can go to, broadly to a population, then you have a much bigger soapbox from which to share your message. And the amount of money that drives this industry, I'm not surprised that corporations behave the way that they do. And I think in order to reverse engineer that, we have to be we have to think tangentially, and we have to look at, people always say that the quickest way to get to something is through. And it's actually not, if you consider your long-term thinking. It's actually around or underneath or over top. So looking at other ways and looking, disconnecting, unplugging, but really thinking strategically how they're benefiting, what the product is, how you're the product, and how you can kind of reverse engineer that. So there are a lot of ways you can do that through obscuring your identity. You can still use social media platforms, but what I've used as a strategy is I try to use a push strategy, and I don't engage as much on some platforms, especially Facebook. Facebook is the worst. There's a thing called off Facebook activity. I tweeted something a while back, and it's something where, if you use Google or anything else, even if you don't authorize an app to say something, Facebook is being fed all of this marketing activity, or all of your activity based on location, based on what you click on, which is, I don't think a lot of people are aware about. And Facebook is, their privacy controls, their security controls are so, it's like a war of information. You can't just go and click on something and it's simple. There's like 50 things you have to click through, and it changes every couple of weeks. So it's really hard to stay on top of it. So if you're not ready to just remove yourself from platforms, at least start thinking about ways that you can obscure some of your information. Remove some of your information. Sure, it's still going to exist, but try to be as disconnected as possible when it comes to systems. And, like I said, with Facebook, off Facebook activity, even if you try, there's still going to be a way around because, again, there's so much money behind it. But there are still things that you can do. And you don't want to live life as a hermit because, unfortunately, we're all connected to this social media monstrosity that's been created. But at the same time, it's opened up communication globally. It's a really weird thing.
Yeah. Rafa, you have some thoughts, I believe. There's a lot of good points that has been coming up over here.
But about the possible like information war that we are under right now, and about the possible real like physical war that is coming up at some point, I just think that like surveillance is the first like stage of that war. Like, you know, you just have to send every single time you're fighting with someone, you have to just send some scouts. You have to get some information about your like opponent. And I think in some sense we are currently in that situation. You know, they might not act, but then again, it's just good to be safe and, you know, get all this information of people and ways to, you know, like sue them or put them in trouble or whatever, or just, you know, manipulate them. And I'm not saying that these companies are like, they are assholes, in my opinion, but the solutions that this documentary was trying to give out, in my opinion, they seem to be pretty much like, you know, basically asking the government to regulate these companies much more so they can't do this kind of stuff. And I don't think that's the real, like a good solution to that. I just think that makes it in a way that these companies are going to look for different kind of loopholes and try to use them as their advantage. I do think that the best solution that we can provide to this issue of data gathering and selling it forwards, I just think that it's the same thing that this documentary is actually doing and what we are doing right now, just providing this information, just sharing it. You know, we can't know what is actually true, what is being fed up to us, and we just think that it's correct. But yeah, basically, you know, just try to bring out your own voice, bring out some information that you think that are valuable to other people, and see what if that changes their preference or way of thinking or their choices, what do they use, and yeah, try to, if possible, build better options. You know, like for example, like you said, this Jitsi right now, I think it's just really awesome. I mean, this is being sent to YouTube, but it's also sent to HCPP TV, of course, like through YouTube. But anyway, this call in itself is through Jitsi, which is an open source stack, as far as I know. And this is being hosted by a friend of mine, his server, his name is Anduk, and he was kind enough to let us borrow his server for this call. But, you know, my point is that I can move this trust that I had for, let's say, Zoom or Hangouts or, you know, Google and the companies behind them. And, you know, I can now choose where do I put this information. You know, and these kind of tools, I think that they are going to be coming up more and more. I don't think that it has been viable before because we hadn't been advanced in technology enough to actually provide these solutions. But now we are starting to be able, and we are starting to get this mindset change that we actually care about avoiding these centralized controlled third parties that are gathering our information.
Yeah, and I think the topic of regulation is also very interesting, and I definitely want to address it before we move on to solutions. But I think the solutions question is actually really interesting, and I have a lot that I want to say about it. I mean, I think I want to hear what you guys think. Alexandra, I believe you were. It's probably quite late over there. I don't know if you're going to stay with us or not. You have any
I'd love to continue the conversation, but I've got to go. For people that are interested, I am giving a talk tomorrow at 1 p.m. I think it'll be live streamed for people that have a ticket, and I'm sure the recording will be available after the fact, and I will publish my slides.
Great. What are you going to be talking about?
It's called Death of the Old Guard, and I kind of highlight the command and control systems that have been, I guess, persistently there throughout the years, and kind of what we can do about it. So it's a problem solution. and I'm taking I'm taking some creative risks. So normally I'm a little bit more I don't know, edited in what I say, but yeah, I'm going for it. So wish me luck.
Excellent. Well, best of luck, and everybody check that out. What's the website where all this stuff is going to show up again? It's
Oh, good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I imagine it'll be likely tied to. I don't know, so I don't want to say.
call it for Hackers Congress. Let me see if I can get it real quick. But anybody, y'all can do a little bit of googling, and you'll find that a Hackers Congress or Parallel Polis, and all this information is going to be there in one form or another. So awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Alexandra. I think it was really interesting discussion and points you made, and best of luck in your speech tomorrow.
Thanks a lot for having me. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So this topic of regulation, I mean, I honestly having...
Oh, sorry, Alexandra, please don't shut the connection.
Oh, yeah, don't turn anything off.
Yeah.
No worries, just muting.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, so this topic of regulation is quite interesting. And I mean, I was an NCAP for the past 10 years. Today, I feel like I've seen it to its logical conclusions, and I'm starting to see to some degree beyond it. And I'm not sure exactly that I can really get into what that means right now, but I think in terms of the regulation problem, we'll see what happens, right? Like Google's being, there's an antitrust sort of lawsuit against it apparently from China, another antitrust lawsuit from the United States. So if Google can hold ground against two antitrust sort of, let's say, offensive moves from nation states, the two most powerful nation states in the world, then that really tells us whether the end of the nation state as we know it is here or not, and whether it has finally arrived. But it also tells us what the future might be, because if Google can hold ground against both China and the United States at the same time, then I think there's pretty much nobody that would be able to really oppose Google, right? And they have all the money in the world, practically speaking, and one of the most richest corporations in history. They have almost an entire stack of communications technology from the top to the bottom, right? They used to have social media. They don't have social media anymore. They own YouTube, right? They have obviously Google. It's a very powerful search engine. And they have Google Maps, and they have, Google advertising, and their reign is not going to be quite as powerful as the reign of any nation state, in the sense that we haven't really seen a militarized Silicon Valley corporation yet, right? These corporations have soft powers of that can only really reach you through your own computers and so on. But like if you look at the way, for example, the COVID pandemic sort of response has been deployed, is like the possibility of like vaccine passports, it's not entirely out of question. And if you look at the Chinese credit score system and the facial recognition and all this stuff, where they can actually limit your movement and limit your access to opportunity based on your compliance to some sort of technocratic morality system, right? Like I don't want to live in that world. I don't want to live in China right now. I am fundamentally a libertarian. I want freedom. I don't want technocratic authoritarianism all around me. And so how we're going to be able to hold ground against that, I think, is a really interesting question. Now, to some degree, going entirely anonymous might not be the best solution just yet. I think what we need is, to transition into this conversation of solutions, I think we need to be able to know how to be anonymous and act anonymously, and we need to defend the possibility of anonymity in the internet. But I think, like personally, what I'm thinking about doing is taking a step back from engaging in social media and then starting a blog on my own domain, which so far domain names have held ground against censorship, and then building a machine that will auto post to the internet and just start doing more blogging and start doing more stuff on my own brand, which is Juansgalt, and then just go from there. But also, like again leveraging these technologies of sovereignty, of cryptographic sovereignty and digital sovereignty, in order to basically hedge myself against the digital totality, right? So I mean that's kind of my little spiel about it. I don't know if you guys have any more thoughts on the regulation stuff. If you don't, then we can move on straight to solutions.
I just wanted to say that, first of all, Rafael, it's a good point, example about the open software alternatives like we're using right now. So that was precisely my point earlier. Like we're doing fine. It's just really difficult and not really mainstream, but that's not really our concern. We are doing fine. But yeah, asking the government or the state to regulate these companies is kind of like asking the bad cop to tell the good cop to leave me alone. You know what I mean? Like, that's not going to really, the state is not on your side in any case. They are there to get you and destroy the value that you created. That's their.
I don't think they want to destroy it though. It's like they don't, like, a parasite doesn't want to kill the host. The parasite just wants to milk it for as much as it can. You know, like viruses don't generally want to kill people. They just want to multiply.
Oh, it's true. But they want to farm the people.
He just wants to milk them, right? So, like, at some point, there's a certain sense of survival from these nation states, and so that they don't really want to destroy you. But yes, they're parasitical in ways that are abhorrent to any sense of justice. Except
that's not to say, parasites are great. Parasitic living can be good for both parties as well. Like the parasitic fish cleaning the other big fish teeth and stuff like that. But that is not the case with the state. The state takes too much. The state hurts us and our liberties too much. So that's why we say no more. Yeah. And then we will possibly transition towards a state. State of affairs where actually state will have to treat people as potential customers, which should downsize the state and its power quite a bit. And perhaps they would actually have to provide those services that they lie and claim to provide and do not provide, or provide lacklusterly, or do say that they do one thing but then actually channel the funds to something completely different that is just furthering somebody's political agenda. So that's going to go. All of that is going to go away once people have the full capacity to exercise their voting rights through their wallets and their legs, basically.
Yeah, that's definitely that's definitely an interesting aspect of this. Rafi, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I basically already said what I think that we should do about the situation itself.
I just remembered kind of what I was going to say on the topic, which was, and then maybe we can talk about solutions a little bit, because I think there's a lot to say on that. The ironic thing is that I believe Facebook was in part funded by, at least there's accusations of Facebook being funded by the CIA, and then in Google taking some deep state money as well. So it's like, what are we seeing? It's like Google and Facebook fighting their VC funds. In a very abstracted way. That's kind of what's happening. So I mean, I think the best case scenario is a world where choice around defense jurisdictions is sort of becomes a normal thing, and where you can really choose the jurisdictions. We need competition among nation states, and that'll probably make them smaller. And I do think that's sort of the most optimistic thing, but it is a long time, like a long term preference, sort of time preference kind of thing. And the thing about I always get those terms confused. So the short time preference is like the immediate reward, and then like long time preference is
high time preference when you prefer to have things at a higher speed. That's the way to think about it.
Okay.
That's a way to think about it. It is confusing and kind of counterintuitive, but low time preference means that you can postpone your wants for a different time frame. So low is good and high is bad. essentially. In this
Right,
context.
and the problem with low time preference or thinking long term is that it's only good if you get to if you survive long enough to enjoy the benefits of long term planning, right? So let's move on to the solutions question. I mean, I think we already touched on one of the general strategies, which is use software that actually is parallel to the mainstream political structure in the sense of parallelly polis, right? Like Jitsi in principle is a kind of parallelly politique. You know, it has fundamental values. It is grounded on open source, and it's trying to do end-to-end encryption and allows communication. And it doesn't have this sort of advertising sort of middleman AI model that causes all these problems. And the same goes for Telegram. Like Telegram is actually quite great in many ways. So, that's one of the things that we can do is sort of build our relationships and our networks on technology that is not fundamentally about digital, like surveillance capitalism, and that protects our privacy further. So I think that alone is a great start. Okay, so how do we defend ourselves from the digital totality, guys?
So, right, there's plenty of tools. I think the biggest struggle here is the struggle of the mind. Like, I'm addicted to chocolate, for example. So my daily struggle is to stay away from that because I know that it's bad for me, no matter how much I get enjoyment in short term from it. And I think the same thing applies to any kind of addiction. Maybe you just need to, I think the best thing to do is like, we have these tools, sure, we can learn how to use them, sure. However, that's not going to be very effective if we don't use them, if we choose to put ourselves in that situation that we don't use them and we take advantage of these conveniences that somehow give pleasure to us. So I think the struggle here is in the mind, and we should find positive feedback loops and that kind of addictions. Like, for example, I'm completely obsessed with Bitcoin. Like, I'm completely addicted to it. I cannot get enough of information conversation about it, but I consider it's very constructive. I consider it's just what I want to do. So I don't consider it a destructive force in my life, but I do recognize that there are destructive forces in my life, and it's just about trying to basically negotiate with myself, because that's essentially what you're doing with yourself. You're trading with yourself. You want to smoke. You're trading yourself. Maybe you have a little bit less time in this world, but that's a trade that you're making at that moment. The same thing if you're using social media. You're making that choice. I'm going to use my time for this instead of something else. Maybe building a business. Maybe writing a nice meme and influencing people or something like that. Or then you can just read somebody else's Twitter feed endlessly, which is also nice at some point, especially when you're learning and falling down the rabbit hole. But from my own experience, I would also say that, work harder and dig deeper and start making your own content and talking to people and writing, even if it's shit. It doesn't matter, because writing is a really powerful tool to internalize your thoughts and ideas and find conviction and find standards in your life. I think, we talk about Bitcoin standard, we talk about gold standard, fiat standard, but what are the standards that we personally hold to ourselves? Because we are the supreme judge and the God of our life.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that this idea of the sovereign individual is really important, and how how to position ourselves in a way that we can actually maximize our will and our potential output is actually really powerful. But I mean, I can't help but think of a dream that I had maybe a year ago, where in the context of this sort of sovereign individual idea, the dream was that I was standing on a hill. It was the top of the hill, and I could see far and wide, and it felt like I was the king of the hill, so to speak, right? But then all of a sudden, as time went on, I started to see the hill around me crumble, and it began to crumble and crumble, kind of how entropy erodes structures over time. and it started to crumble until all that was left was a little piece of rock that I was standing on with one foot. And then that also crumbled, and I fell from the hill. And there was no hill left. And what I took from that dream is that there is a kind of fragility in individuality, and it's, you know, taken to the furthest extreme. It's like, yeah, okay, you can be the king of the hill, but you will only be there for so long, and you're kind of centralizing yourself in a weird way, right? And I think the lesson there is that, okay, yes, aim for sovereignty, but realize that there's redundancy in relationships with other people. There's redundancy in connection and in deploying and joining standards that are held by other people and with other people. And so, I mean, I just wanted to share that as a sort of interesting kind of metaphor for the stuff that we're dealing with. You know, we want to be able to stand on our own 2 feet, but we also need to build, you know, like we can't take on the world by ourselves. We do need to be able to hold ground and reach a certain kind of critical mass, so to speak, in order to defend ourselves from the sort of, I guess, the evils of the world. I mean, I know I'm talking in very big terms, but yeah.
Yeah, I do kind of agree with you. I mean, in a sense that, yeah, we can't. Well, for example, I don't want to live just by myself. I don't want to grow my own food, and you know, I want stuff like, for example, a computer. I wouldn't build this myself. I mean, of course, I can do barter, but you know, I would have to at least have someone who goes on and outside of the, you know, outside of my area to actually get these parts, or you know, build this and get this all together. So we have to do some kind of like cooperation to actually go forward. But well, I do think that mainly the biggest issue currently with like these companies like Facebook and all of the others are just that we haven't realized the issue with this kind of centralized power just yet. And we should, in my opinion, just, you know, and we probably will in time, just grow on to be a little bit more like, not to trust that much, but to actually try to find out as much as you can, and you know, just not trust the big narratives. You know, if there's 100,000 people saying that this guy is great, he maybe still is not. You know, you just have to question pretty much everything. I just think that needs a certain kind of like time period for this big paradigm shift in people's mind to actually happen.
Yeah. You know, something else that I'm thinking about is, you know, we don't necessarily have to try and build like, okay, there's value in anchoring part of our life in sovereignty technology and sovereignty solutions. But on the other hand, I mean, I have a product that I want to sell, and I'm genuinely thinking about just doing some straight capitalist advertising on Facebook, right? I mean, it is maybe the best advertising platform that has ever been invented, right? And, you know, everybody's on it and everybody knows that there's advertisements. So maybe I'll just go and sell my product on there, right? And I think, you know, while these tools are available to us and everybody else is using them, we would be handicapping ourselves by not using them as well. The bottom line is, can we exit the system on will when we need to, when it makes sense to? And I think that's the key thing that we have to hold ground on, right? It's the same idea as you know, making sure that there's at least a gate or some way out of the walled garden, you know, of these exchanges and everything else. Like you know, we're kind of like trafficking in freedom here, and so that's I think the activist sort of political line that we have to hold. We have to be able to defend the ability to exit the systems, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also leverage the potential, the power that these systems offer us. And so, you know what? I mean, I I think, I don't think there's anything inherently moral with advertising for, valuable and useful things on Facebook, and there's power to it. We might as well use it right now because, everybody else is, right?
Mm,
And the same goes for many of these other platforms.
yeah, I just wanted to say that this is maybe like unpopular opinion, but I do think that there's a big difference on the things that we actually do in practice in real life and the things that we actually see that would be nice or correct or right. And these maybe just doesn't match every single day on our lives. But the biggest point to me is to just actually realize this, that everything that we decide to do is maybe not correct or right. I mean, I'm not saying that marketing or advertisement would be wrong. I'm just saying, like, I do believe in a way that if you have a really, really good product that would even, success in a system with hard money where people actually try to save and not just spend on bullshit, you will get your product into the ear or into the knowledge of people by, the basic like Bush radio, however, Uber or, for example, Tor or Linux or Bitcoin or whatever these products, if they are big and meaningful enough, they will get the attention. And the point is that we are just, expecting to get this like major, like, how would I say, customer base, just really quickly. And that's where we are going into this, like, forcing, not forcing, but, trying to push our advertisement into people that they might do really want to see it or may not. But we are taking the chance that we are pushing it anyway. We are okay with it morally, that we are just now pushing this stuff to you without even knowing if you are really interested or not, or that these are actually, just profiles made by these third-party companies that are selling your information to us. But yeah, in some sense, I would just say that, I don't know, this just requires a lot of time to get, any into the best possible scenario. Well, maybe not the best, but, into a decent alternative of this. But yeah, for example, it used to be like in maybe 10 or more years ago, you could only call people with Skype. And, it's a centralized server, again, a service provider, and it sells all your information and all of that stuff. But now we do already have options. Like 10 years from now, I do believe we have some kind of Twitter or Facebook alternatives. And yeah, and, marketing in those, I don't know. You can probably do that, but I would just prefer to, just stop the whole marketing thing, even though I do totally understand that people do that because it's effective in current system and everybody else is doing it. So if you're not taking advantage of these tools, you're like, you're not on the same level. You're not using as good of tools to grow. I understand that. And that's why I think it's totally understandable that you would use these kind of things. But if you go on and think that now it is like totally okay or morally right or something like that, if that you use the service changes your mind about it, I think that's the wrong thing.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit. At least I just want to mention some of the solutions that were offered by the documentary itself in terms of helping protect your mind from this sort of push, from third parties into your mind, right? Including this AI and the advertisers. And one of the things they say is just simply, first thing you do is just cancel, like turn off all notifications on your phone and on your computer. And I mean, I've been doing this for years, and I'm really happy that I do it. I mean, I have a kind of addictive personality, and I've actually studied addictions professionally. in addictions counseling and how to change addictions. It's actually quite difficult, though very much doable. And so, like, I understand how powerful this stuff is, and yeah, turning off notifications is essential because it just distracts you, right? And if you're a creative person, it takes a while to regain your focus into a topic. If somebody bursts through the door, or if your phone starts ringing and just like, all right, you got to snap out of it, and then it takes a while to warm the engine again to get back into the flow of whatever you were doing. So for the pursuit of creative output in particular, it's important to protect your focus. It's actually really valuable to be able to protect your focus, So turning off notifications is very effective. If you find yourself addicted to social media, apparently, one of the things that's, I think obviously useful for that is being able to measure how much time you're spending in it. And then the other thing would be obviously just journal with yourself in a quiet space and moment. Like maybe grab a notebook and literally write out what are the benefits of being in social media, what are the costs of being in social media, and what would be the benefits of getting out of it or managing it in a different way versus the cost of doing it, right? And having that conversation will at least liberate you from being just there out of habit and out of sort of dopamine addiction, right? And you'll actually be making a very conscious choice about your use of that platform. That's not all that it takes to change a habit. You kind of have to reinforce it if you do change a habit. So, I mean, there's you can grab a calendar and just mark days, of successful shift of the habits and so on. But I mean, I think that sort of lays one of the basic strategies. And there's actually a bunch of tools that they recommend. I'm actually going to share the link. I'm just going to share the solutions suggested. I'll just paste them on the chat right now on YouTube. And these were all sort of these were all kind of websites and solutions that they offered. I mean, another one that they mentioned is, set some time limits for them, and and don't, like, separate it from sleep, for example. Get your computers out of the bedroom so that you can actually go to sleep. One of the problems that I struggle with a lot, and I think a lot of people do as well, is that the blue light that comes out of the screens actually suppresses your melatonin production. Melatonin is the hormone that helps your brain get sleepy. And so this sort of creates a positive feedback loop of staying online later and then going to bed really late, which means you miss a certain circadian rhythm sleep cycles that are important for your body's regeneration and healing. And so you wake up late. And then so not only are you missing part of the peak productivity of society, which happens in the morning, but you're also not recovering as effectively and healing your body as effectively as you could. So there's all these sort of unintended maybe unintended consequences to the digital life, and I think it's actually quite valuable to take control of them, take conscious control of them, and I'm probably going to write some content about this because I think about it a lot, and I think it's sort of really it potentially very valuable to be able to manage these habits, right?
That's an interesting point. I mean, we can't even know where this all information aid, where is this going to lead? We haven't tested out what actually happens to the kids that are playing, like, for example, the first 10 years of their life with video games or something like that. We're just going to see, and yeah, we should be like careful with pretty much everything.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to also mention is, like, if you are not really ready to just quit like some certain social media, just try to take these small steps into like improving your privacy. Like, for example, switching from Linux or Mac into from Windows or Mac, for example, into Linux or some or let's say, from using like credit cards, moving to like Bitcoin, for example, or if you can't, move from Zoom to Jitsi. And there's also like currently all like chatting apps, like, for example, Telegram, and that example is probably better than Facebook, but they just have really different kind of UI. So you're gonna have to do some trade-offs. But there is a lot of different options. You don't have to go all the way. You can just take, small steps to improve your situation.
Yeah, I mean, just the most essential form of risk management and sort of hedging that you can do against the modern digital totality state is actually to buy some Bitcoin and put it in cold storage, and make sure you secure that properly, which is not trivial, but it's doable. And that hedges you against everything else. Like even if you just do that, and then like if you just do dollar cost averaging into offline cold storage Bitcoin, while you're also full on panopticon, digital totality social media business, like using all the tools of the modern age, despite the surveillance, like that, like that's probably not a bad strategy, just totally play the game, but then hedge yourself with a dollar cost average offline Bitcoin strategy. And then if the end of the modern system comes, then you'll have your foot on the next era already, right? So anyway, just a thought. Rafa, you got some? No, Nico, you have some thoughts. Go for it.
Yeah, earlier you're talking about the ads and ad blockers and stuff, and yeah, I block those too, and notifications. However, I think we are overlooking one important point here, because some people like the customized ads. They consider it as a service that the company collects their information of purchases and preferences. So then they can offer them opportunities to spend money on the same things that they like. So actually, there's quite a bit of people that I've run into who consider this as a service, that they are, they could be even be, well, they are paying for it. They're not monetarily paying for it, but they're happy to use the service regardless of, actually it's a plus for them that they collect your information and data. And if, probably they don't care if it's being monetized or not, because why would they if they're getting what they want from the deal?
Right.
And about the time management, like, yeah, it's a good idea to be aware of how long you spend staring at the screen. However, I would just personally, that doesn't really work for me, micromanaging my time. I just rather do something that inspires me. So the way I think about it is, what is my long-term goal, or what is my short-term goal, my immediate goals, and then just ask myself, did I work for that today? Did I work for that this hour? How did I spend this hour? Is the actions I took during these hours taking me towards one of my goals that I have set for myself? And regardless how I arrive at that goal, I don't care really. If I did it sitting on social media, that's a possibility. So I wouldn't rule that out as an immediate thing to try to focus and try to limit. And in terms of children, I have no idea about that either, like how it affects their development. But let's say that, let's limit the discussion here for just my point, just to grown adults who are capable physically and mentally to make this decision for themselves. So in that, and of course you have to be aware of getting enough exercise, getting enough sunlight, getting enough sleep. But those are not exclusive things. You can, I feel like you can spend way more time in the screen, because personally I've been in front of the screen probably half of my life. And I'm not the shining example of health or anything, but I'm doing perfectly fine for myself, and I don't consider myself at a loss because of that. So then I'm just kind of like, whenever somebody says that, yeah, you should limit your screen time, I'm always kind of a little bit are you so sure about that? And a little bit of fringe on that.
Right.
So if you have goals, should it really matter how you get there? As long as you don't hurt anybody, you don't steal, you don't initiate violence, you are operating peacefully, cooperating with other people to reach your goal, then because you can't really plan the route, can you? Because life is volatile, there's too many variables, so you kind of have to wing it anyway. And what Rafa said about that we have to be really careful, I disagree with that. We have to be willing to take these risks, and to fail, because that is the only way we can learn and find success. And I feel like the society is doing a great job in nannying people into being too scared of taking any risks, of stepping outside the system and looking ridiculous and being ridiculous because you're wearing a tinfoil hat or whatever, this kind of things, like herd mentality. So yeah, especially for young people, like if you're not taking massive risks in life, what the hell are you doing? That's how you achieve greatness, by risking your ass and then getting handsomely rewarded one day for that. If you never try, then of course you can never achieve anything, but you also can't fail. But then again, you are really already failing life if you're not trying to strive for any higher meaning, in my opinion.
I just wanted to
go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that, I mean, maybe like we should be more careful about judging what is actually true and what is not, whatever there is on internet. Be more careful about trusting people and trying to verify everything. Just trying to avoid of having these like centralized third parties that are actually doing everything for you. We have to have a little bit more responsibility, and that means that we have to be a little bit more careful when doing our decisions. Or we can't just rely that now the news or whatever TV says is actually true. We are done with that time. The information age makes it available that everybody can go on and spread their message. So you have to just learn to be much more critical about things.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. That was my misunderstanding.
Yeah, no, I think you strike a good point. I mean, there's really no fixed position to take to end up in a good place always. There's kind of like this balance between trying to take control of your environment in order to minimize the risk of something terribly wrong going, like something terribly wrong happening, right? So like there's value in trying to assert and impose control over your environment. And I'm not talking about like violent control. I'm just talking about like managing, trying to plan out for your life to some degree. But then there's sort of the far end of that is like you become a tyrant, with the total control over everything, including other people. So that's bad. And then the other side of that is that if you don't take any risks, you're right. You don't get to benefit from some of the great things out there that are available to the human experience. So it's important to really, there's a kind of like balance that only you can be the judge of at the end of the day. Every individual has to kind of decide how to play that game. And I mean, I think as far as kids go, I'm very much starting to favor the idea of just, no screen time till they're 16. But on the other hand, being a competent programmer early on really is one of the most predictable ways for you to be successful in the future, right? Like the difference, the people making most of the money and having most of the influence today are in some way programmers, right? They are, as a career, and as a strategy for success in the modern world, learning how to speak computer and how to manipulate robots is actually very, very effective. So how do you both protect kids from screen time and teach them how to code at the same time? There's probably a solution there that it just has to be really kind of worked out. Might even be out there already.
I don't have any kids, so it's easy for me to say, but I would really actually let them have a lot of the screen time if they actually really want it for themselves. It depends on what kind of things to do, well, maybe if it's something that they've heard from school or something like that is actually really stupid, but everybody's just into it. Maybe, okay, I'm not a fan of it, but in some sense, the main thing that I would teach is that, whatever you do, just be ready to go on a totally different way whenever some new information is presented to you. And Don't be hesitant to take this new, totally different information. Even if you learn to be a coder, you play a ladder now, you grow up with the internet, and there's no point where you can't just go on and change it. It doesn't like restrict you. It can be a really good thing. The best people are actually really into stuff, so they devote all of their time into it. So if you want to be really good, you have to go all the way. But just don't think it as like a social pressure that you have just chosen this or walked this path and now you have to just continue on it. Or it can be about your choices or your beliefs, whatever. The point is the same.
Yeah, don't put all your eggs in one basket unless you know everything about everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's actually a quote by I can't remember, but basically it was saying like when you know what is a good investment, then diversification is actually a bad strategy. But I think in this case, I mean, I think it's good to always keep some options out there so you can pivot if things really take a bad turn against you,
Yeah, I think that's really great what Rafa said. Like, be okay with being wrong. Be okay with changing your mind and changing your opinion in light of new data, because you should be aware of that and regard all the data that comes in, and then reflect how does this impact me and my life. And if you don't do that, if you just get complacent and you kind of like only accept the things that confirm the bias that you currently hold, then you're just in a false security. Like there's this meme of regulation that there's like this fence that this governments build, and then too many people lean on the fence and then it breaks, and then the people are kind of like quote unquote left with nothing. And I think this is the false sense of security is a problem, because if you haven't hit rock bottom, then you don't know really your limit. You don't know, and it's scary. You don't know how it's going to feel. But once you have hit rock bottom, then you realize that you have nothing left to. There's nowhere more lower than you can go, so you can only go up, and that's a really empowering experience. I'm speaking from my own experience. I've hit rock bottom twice, because how would you otherwise know that is the bottom? Right.
Yeah, I've hit the rock bottom at least once in my life, probably a couple of times as well. It's how you grow, man. It's a wave. And it's the difference between like people are like, oh, Bitcoin is really volatile. Yeah, but it's alive. A heartbeat is a wave. It's not a flat line. So volatility is proof of living.
Yeah, and about this Bitcoin volatility thing, people just are expecting this kind of like a Schrodinger's Bitcoin that is at the same time bringing them a lot of fortune, but then again, not being stable and not volatile. So, people just tend to complain about things that they don't understand correctly.
That's a ridiculous argument. Like it's both super stable and non-volatile, because one Bitcoin is always one Bitcoin, and that's what you should be looking at. How many Bitcoins do you have? How many Satoshis are you stacking? And not the fiat valuation. Obviously, fiat valuation matters as long as we are in fiat standard. But if you have a low enough time preference, you will start to think in Satoshis. You will start to see every purchase you make as an investment in your future. I've like when I found Bitcoin, when I understood Bitcoin, that the monetary aspect of it and the scarcity of it, I really started to think like I used to spend money recklessly, like the fiat way that they teach you in school, basically, that you need to do that. And then once I realized Bitcoin, then I really started to think, oh my God, like, do I really want to buy this? Can I afford to buy this? Because I need those sats. I'd rather buy some sats. So for me, it has had like immense positive implications in my life. I've learned to save just because of Bitcoin. I was never taught how to save, not at home, not at school, certainly. So it's been a really empowering experience as well, and enlightening and humbling.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Sometimes I try to take a step back from my life and think, okay, am I really supporting something that's fundamentally good? Like, is Bitcoin really good for the world? And that, it's not an easy question. I think it can seem obvious on the surface, but if you can like it's a question worth thinking about, and I think this is one of the arguments that are really give me peace of mind in that I'm actually supporting something good, because Bitcoin teaches you to resist your immediate impulses to spend your money. Like it teaches you to save, which is very, very effective. It reinforces that part of you that thinks about the long term. And I mean, in the long term, we're all dead, but before that, we are going to be suffering the consequences of our earlier choices, and so I think it's good to think about how to live in a way that's both good for the now and for the future, and for the future of your family and then your people around you, but also, you know what I mean? Like it's good to not be entirely blind to the future. Otherwise, we're just little animals responding like robots to whatever's in front of us, and that's not really, that's just being vulnerable to puppetry and manipulation, or just not being conscious, right? That's not really being human, almost, right? And then the other thing about Bitcoin that's really great is that if you, like, everybody that enters Bitcoin enters it entirely, like, inherently from a greed perspective. Usually, I mean, they might be interested in the technology, but it's the pursuit of money and wealth that brings them in. And then once they start trading, what happens is either their arrogance in thinking that they can predict the price will get crushed by the market, which is a good thing, because arrogance is generally a bad thing. And then if they can overcome that, then they'll learn that there's a kind of fundamental humility that you have to have when you're a trader, and which is that you don't know what's going to happen, and all you're doing is taking risks and calculated risks. So A, you have to learn how to manage risk, and B, you have to be okay with being wrong. And both those things, that humility is a very valuable virtue. It's a very valuable thing to integrate into your life as a human being, I think. And so that's two values, the two virtues that Bitcoin delivers to people down this rabbit hole that are, I think, inherently like good for humanity. So I mean, that's just good news all around, I think. All right. I mean, we're almost done here. We're running to the end of the hour. Which, I mean, thank you guys for joining us. I think it's been a really great conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I've gotten to kind of air some of my thoughts on a lot of different topics, and the documentary was excellent. I believe you guys are going to continue the show, and I'm not sure what you guys are going to talk about, or is this the end of your?
This is the end of this discussion and our slot. Also, there's going to be a flip from BTC Mag, and he's going to talk with Andrew Chow.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like a great conversation. So, very much looking forward to that. I got 5:57 p.m. over here, so the hour is almost done. Is there anything else you guys would like to share before we move on?
Nico, you go ahead first.
Oh, thank you for everybody who listened to us, and it's been a pleasure as always. I always like to talk about these topics, and if you're interested, I'm pretty active on Twitter. You can find me at Omnifin, double N at the end. And yeah, thanks for everybody. It was nice.
Yeah, also thanks from my side. I really enjoyed this discussion, and thanks Juan for hosting it mainly. I mean, you did a really great job. And thanks for Alexandra to coming into the discussion for the first hour also. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's really great to be a part of this conference on HCPP TV. And really thanks a lot for everyone who's contributing to this. And yeah, let's keep the show going on. There's still a lot more content to come.
Show must go on. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think that was some excellent topics that we touched on. I got to go as well. So for anybody interested in what I'm up to, you can find me at